So, in today's video, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about ready-to-wear fashion, talk about the history, but also explain what ready-to-wear is, because in fashion there are many terms that are widely used in fashion. I feel like it's good to provide a greater context as to what these things mean. So, talking about ready-to-wear, ready-to-wear fashion is fashion that is made in standardized sizes. And what this means is that it's made to the average body, the average person, and it's standardized to fit most people. That means it won't fit all people. So in other words, it's clothing that isn't bespoke, what people call like off the rack, off the peg, off the shelf. That is ready-to-wear fashion. Now in some countries, the culture of ready-to-wear fashion is a bit strange. Reason being, I am from Nigeria. And in a country like Nigeria, there are people who cannot afford anything in a store. So they just buy thrifted clothing, they buy secondhand clothing that comes from Europe. And the people that could possibly afford to go to a store would rather just go to a tailor. And I remember when I lived in Nigeria, there was never really a time when I bought anything from any store. I don't think I ever bought anything from any store. Every time I needed a garment, we always went to the tailor to get it made. So we bought the fabric and we got it made. And I feel like in the West, because the West is so commercial, they've lost the appreciation of craftsmanship, of how things fit on the body and things like that. So I'm sure what you are now wondering is, okay, so why is ready-to-wear clothing a thing? If bespoke fashion is better, and obviously it's better to get things tailor-made to your body, obviously, and to your measurements, then why is ready-to-wear clothing so widely available? And why is it so accessible at the moment? And my answer to that question would be commercialism, it would be capitalism. So what happened in the 1900s, when you look at the clothing that women in the 1900s wore, from a garment construction perspective, these garments were very complicated to make. So they were the type of things that couldn't really be mass produced to fit a wide range of bodies. And that is why things were still bespoke and things were still made to fit someone's body at the time in the early 1900s. Now, what then happened, as a way to make the fashion industry more profitable, clothing manufacturers started making garments in these very simplified ways. And they simplified the way garments looked. So garments went from being very flowy and voluminous to just like a straight shirt or a straight plain skirt or dress. And then that then allowed for them to kind of make more standardized sizes that could fit a wider range of people. So between 1939 and 1940, American women were actually measured all across the United States so that garment factories and fashion companies could actually come up with standardized sizes that would fit most women. And this is kind of when we saw more clothing being mass produced. Now, it's good to note before then, garments were really made to last. And when garments were constructed and made, what people were thinking about was quality first, high quality first. So a reason why garment quality has been going down over the years is fashion at the time was not, it wasn't about being global, it wasn't about globalization. It was about, you could go to your local tailor who could make you an amazing garment with amazing materials, and you would have a garment that would last. But when big garment companies and fashion companies took over, and in America they wanted to mass produce things, they obviously started spending less money on getting good fabrics because they would rather put that money into stuff like advertisement to kind of promote their product. And this is kind of, this whole capitalist mindset is what started to make the quality of garments gradually get worse and worse and worse over the years. And this is why they implemented simpler designs and made all the designs simpler so they could use less fabrics, so it could be made with cheaper materials, and just so that it was cheaper to produce in general, basically. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a history journey basically from what happened during the Industrial Revolution to now, to explain to you how we ended up with the concept of ready-to-wear fashion, and basically why the quality of garments right now is so terrible, even from like high-end luxury brands, so to speak. First, we need to talk about what was going on before the Industrial Revolution. Now, before the Industrial Revolution, clothing was produced on a very small scale. It was very, like I said, kind of like go to your local factory and go to your local seamstress and they'll get the garments made. It was something that took a long time to make, but it was also, everything was made by hand and everything was made by really, really skilled workers. So it was more about quality and less about, oh, I want this really quick. And that is also kind of what changed that made garments produced so badly, like our current garments that we have now. So in 1738, Lewis Paul and John Wyatt invented the roller spinning machine, and this allows you to basically spin and roll cotton into more of a thread, and then this thread could be used in garment production. And this was kind of one of the first inventions that caused what we know as the mass production and led to the mass production of fashion. So over the years, kind of like every invention, people were trying to improve the roller spinning machine. So a lot of what happened is, I think in 1964, there were improvements made to where it could roll and spin more cotton, like per minute. It was faster. And then in 1770, a guy called Richard Arkwright created a much faster roller spinning machine that was powered by water. This could really spin threads really quickly. It could roll cotton into threads at a really fast rate. So yeah, this was kind of one of the big inventions when it comes to the fashion industry. But bear in mind, all these roller spinning machines, and yes, it was really good that there was a lot of innovation going on in the 1700s, but it's good to note that you still had to manually take these threads and then construct it individually as a person to create the garments. So yes, the processing of the cotton material itself into threads became really fast, and you didn't need people to do this anymore. You still needed people to weave it into a textile or to weave it into a garment. So this was a big drawback for the fashion industry in terms of mass production, because it still made the process quite slow in general. So then this leads us to 1784, and a guy called Edmund Cartwright, he invented something called the power loom. So the roller spinner would actually spin the cotton material into threads, and then the power loom will take these threads and then be able to process these into a cloth or like a textile. And that was the big breakthrough, because before then you still needed people to manually do the second part, which is take the threads and then make it into a cloth or a textile. Now, all these inventions, when it came to this textile production, they all happened in England. So that's why a lot of people, and this is why I really love making videos like this, a lot of people talk about how England used to be one of the greatest garment production companies, and it was known for producing high quality garments. It was around the time because a lot of the fashion innovation all happened in England. So this meant that things like power looms and the roller spinners were readily available all across England, and England were producing clothing at an insane rate. They were making things like hats, jackets, t-shirts, trousers so easily because they had all this machinery available to them and they could make things very quickly. And this is why England became one of the big exporters of all these goods around the time. And that's also why England was known as kind of like where you buy high quality garments at around that time. But moving to the 19th century, so now I'm trying to create a picture. So now we have the roller spinning machines, and these are the machines that get the cotton and roll it into a thread. And then we have the power loom that takes these threads and makes it into kind of like a textile or cloth. Now, if you know anything about fashion design, you know Then as a fashion designer or seamstress or whatever you are, a tailor, you take this fabric, this cloth, and then you make a pattern. And then from that pattern, you cut it out and then you sew all the seams and blah, blah, blah. So they had the first two stages covered, but still in the 19th century, at the start of the 19th century, there was still no mechanical way of like using a machine to cut out all these garments to make the patterns and to sew all the patterns together. There was still no machinery for that. So it was still very labor intensive. They still needed loads of people, even with all the machinery they had invented to kind of speed up the process. And at the time, there was a lot of things going on, because with the implementation of this machinery, it meant that a lot of people were losing their jobs. And of course, people are not happy about that. So around this time, there was a lot of looting, a lot of people destroying the machines, which was a cost to these companies as well, because people saw it as a threat to their occupation, to their livelihood. Rightly so. I wouldn't advocate to destroy machinery, but I can understand their frustrations, definitely. Now we are moving into the late 1800s and moving into Victorian times. Victorian times is probably one of the worst eras of British history. Not because there were a lot of inventions that did happen, and I know a lot of people are very optimistic, but me with my pessimistic mindset, this is a lot of the time when a lot of brutality occurred in British history, and some of the worst acts in human history happened around this time. And in the fashion industry, this is no different. In the late 1800s, as England was establishing itself as a top exporter of high quality garments and clothing, they wanted to kind of increase the rate at which they could export these goods to countries like the United States, other European countries. And because of this, a lot of garment factories started hiring people of all ages, just any age, people that were in need. And of course, some people have no choice. When you're like 8 years old, your family, everyone's going to work, but you still don't have enough money to even get by, then of course, that forces people of all ages to just go to work. And this was around the time when people were just being overworked. The hours were almost comparable to slavery. The wages that these workers, these garment workers were getting was so low, it's basically slavery. It was basically nothing. To work grueling conditions, no air conditioning. They had to work non-stop. If they slept on the job or if they slacked, they were beaten or punished severely. They were supposed to work 12-hour days, but of course, as they loved to do in the Victorian times, these workers were exploited. So of course, they would make them work overtime and not pay them extra, but make them work sometimes all day, way over 12 hours. And that was something that happened on a frequent basis. There were also physiological effects on the workers. Of course, there was a lot of toxic steam from just all the processes going around in the factories. And because these people were so congested and there was no real ventilation, a lot of them kind of picked up respiratory issues. There was also issues with eyesight because the lighting was so dim. So yeah, and these issues actually made the government implement a law in 1833. And this law said that people who were under the age of 9 should not be allowed to work in mills or any garment type of factory. And this was really good. It did some things. It meant that kids too young weren't picking up respiratory issues so young. However, it did not solve the terrible wages. It did not solve that people older, like adults, were still being asked to do overtime and still being asked to work 20 hours when their contract said 12 and they're only being paid for 12. So yeah, there were a lot of things that did not get fixed, but at least it was a start and it was a push in the right direction. And it shows that sometimes when you want things to change and you want things to change for the better, it takes baby steps to get to the big step. But now, remember when I said that with a lot of the invention in the 1700s, I need to remind you guys about this stuff just so I can I'm trying to paint a perfect picture here. So bear with me. So we had these spinning machines. They used to spin the cotton into the threads. And then we had the loom, which of course took this thread and made it into a garment. But remember I said that people still had to manually create the patterns and sew the patterns together. However, in 1846, Elias invented what we now know as a sewing machine. Obviously, not the digital crazy sewing machines we have now, but the idea and the prototype of what a sewing machine first was invented by Elias Howe in 1846. And of course, this allowed the garment workers and the sewers and the seamstresses, whatever you want to call them, it allowed them to sew and piece together garments at a way faster rate. So of course, this meant that garments could be produced at a faster rate because it just sped up the whole process in general. So of course, sewing machines have obviously advanced a lot since the 1800s, obviously. However, Elias Howe is still credited for being kind of like the original inventor. And if it wasn't for Elias, there would be no such thing as a sewing machine, really. So all that being said, all these kind of advancements in the mass production of fashion, this was more for people who are lower class. These garments were made for people who are like more lower class or especially middle class. People who are upper class, the really wealthy people, the royals of the world, they were still going to seamstresses and getting things tailor-made to them. And I think you can still relate that to kind of like now, because rich people even now, a lot of them don't pick stuff like off the rack. They still go to tailors, they still go to seamstresses, they buy haute couture, for crying out loud. Like these guys, yeah. In the 1800s, one of the advancements when it came to sewing machines is there was an invention of kind of like this home sewing machine that people could then use in their home. Obviously, lower class people couldn't afford it, but people who are middle class were the main people and the main customers and the target audience for this sewing machine, because wealthy people didn't care to learn to sew because they could just pay someone to do it. People who were middle class wanted to get the look of people that were upper class, but they couldn't afford to pay someone to do it. But it was a good investment to invest and learn how to sew and invest in the sewing machine. So what did they do? They would steal the patterns of the seamstresses who made these garments for high-end clients, the wealthy clients, and then just copy it, basically. And that's how a lot of middle-class people, they look similar to the upper-class people, but the materials weren't the same. And obviously the construction of things was not as good. But yeah, I just thought it's kind of an interesting thing to note. And then moving on finally to the end of the 19th century, so this is late 1800s. Of course, this is when we started to see actual big department stores, and they had all these standardized sized garments, all for different people, from a size 6 to an 8 to a 10 and all that sort of stuff in stores. And of course, to entice people into these stores also had things like bars, and they had kind of like places where you could drink tea, places where you could have lunch. And it's kind of strange because now when we think of stores that have tea at the top floor and stuff, it's more posh stores that have that. You don't walk into a H&M and expect to have tea. And it's just crazy how things from then to now just kind of watered down, and they just start cutting costs and cutting costs and cutting costs. It's crazy to think. But moving into the 20th century, 20th century is probably a very, very, very important era to talk about, because this is the century before the century we're in now, and this is where most of the change happened. Especially in America, the United States. Of course it happened in America. Capitalists, the land of capitalism, of course. They made everything cheaper and they made everything cost more. for less quality. But yeah, the 20th century was where we started to see a lot of these department stores, especially in America, once again, copy couture dresses and couture garments. And of course, people get so annoyed now when brands like Zara copy a brand like, I don't know, Balenciaga, and they just get what Balenciaga did, steal all their ideas that took a year to develop, and then just mass produce it in terrible, cheap ass quality garments, and everyone gets angry. But actually, this has been going on since the start of the 20th century, which is quite fascinating and quite interesting. In the 20th century, not just in kind of garment production, but just in terms of social justice, America is a place known for social justice, and it's known for people protesting and fighting for their rights. In England, the culture was more, you just accept what the masters tell you, whereas in America, people are more, in a good way, people are more rebellious. So, of course, the garment factory conditions in England, in America, wherever, were really terrible. People were dying from respiratory problems. People had permanent damage by working in a lot of these garment factories. So what happened in the 20th century, there was kind of an uproar and an uprise of people who protested against these garment factories in general and the slave wages that people were being paid, essentially. And I think what kind of tipped the scale was on the 25th of March in 1911. There was a case where a garment factory caught on fire, and because of just the way these, and this actually happens in Italy now, like there's still factories in Italy where they like lock immigrant workers in the factory and force them to work crazy hours. They still do this now, and I'm surprised people can legally still do this now. But anyway, back in 1911, March 25th, a garment factory in America caught fire and loads of people died. And that obviously helped in the protest of people trying to bring awareness to how these people are being treated in garment factories and just the working conditions in general. And around this time, this was when unions formed. So what a lot of workers did was they formed a union and they kind of made their own factory, and they all worked in this own factory. So what you would see is on garments, there would be this special kind of tag sewn in to signify that it was made by a union. So those pieces would normally be more expensive, but at least you know that because it's made from a union, people have been paid fair wages.
This is no import. We made this blouse. We belong to the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and we have sewn our union label right in here. It tells you we're able to do what every American wants to do, have a job doing honest work at decent wages. When you see the union label, think of us, making a living, making your clothes right here in America.
Look for the union label when you are buying a coat dress or blouse. Remember somewhere our union sewing, our wages going to feed the kids and run the house. We work hard, but who's complaining? Thanks to the ILG, we're paying our way. So always look for the union label. It says we're able to make it.
Also means that things were constructed properly by people that actually are making garments to make garments high quality, not making garments because some boss said, I want you to make 5,000 garments in like 1 week. And what I can actually relate that to now is how now it's kind of, it reminds me of this whole sustainability thing where now people really care to see, people look at labels to see, is it recycled materials? Are they using high quality materials and stuff like that? I find it really interesting because I don't think, even when the unions formed in the 1900s, I'm not sure how many people really cared about supporting the unions. which was really bad. And of course, between 1939 and 1940, like I've mentioned earlier in this video, but obviously I'm mentioning it again because timelines, this was when they did a measurement of loads of women in America to get a standardized measurement for a lot of shops and department stores that sold garments. The only way they could implement standardized sizes properly was to make the clothing simple to the point where things could be produced really fast. If you have these really complicated voluminous dresses, you can't produce that stuff really quickly, even with a sewing machine. But I think what I really hate about fashion and the fashion industry is that even in the, let's say the 1940s, when they made all these standardized sizes and they were making clothing more simple so that they could mass produce it, at least back then, garments were still made to last and they were still made with high quality materials. Garment factories didn't cut corners by using cheap fabrics or badly made fabrics or rushed textiles. They actually made sure that the materials were actually the best of the best, even if the way they constructed it was rushed. But also in the 1940s, there was also a big culture of just people sewing things themselves. So most middle class people, not lower class, but definitely most middle class people, had sewing machines at home. So if anything did rip or whatever, they had the means and the ability to sew it back together and to mend things. And because the garment quality itself was high quality, even if let's say the finishing wasn't the best, these things would last years and years and years. And that's why in vintage stores you can still find things from the 1900s in amazing condition, whereas if you buy something now from one of these cheap stores, it'll rip and fade and it'll basically be useless in like a year. And kind of as time progressed, you know, America in general, it's all about profit margins, isn't it? So of course there's only many ways you can make the fashion industry more profitable. It's either you pay people less, which they couldn't because there was more protests, more unions forming around the time, and as you progress through the 1900s. So where else could they save money from apart from make the materials cheaper and make the cost of production cheaper? Less workers, but make them do the same work, so overwork these workers. Increase the prices while making the quality less and reducing the quality. So a combination of these things bring us to fashion in the current day, which if it isn't made by a high-end brand, it's absolute 9 times out of 10 absolute garbage. Like fast fashion brands like Zara, H&M, Topman. And if it is made by a high-end brand, that still isn't a guarantee that it's made with high quality. It's made high quality. It has to be made in a proper Italian garment factory, not a garment factory where you use workers as slaves in Italy like a lot of factories still are, and they use immigrant workers and rush them and lock them in rooms and force them under these terrible conditions to make these garments. And then these high-end brands, they put on their labels made in Italy, and it's no different from being made anywhere else that people frown upon. So yeah, the fashion industry is a complete mess. And yeah, that brings us to the current day in fashion, the current time, the 21st century, of course. The 21st century, and as of today, most garments, so I think I read a statistic that said 42% of all the garments made right now are made with polyester. And anyone that knows anything, once again, about materials, I should probably make a separate video, about materials. But polyester is basically plastic. It's not a good material at all. It's not good for your skin. It doesn't last long. It's terrible. It's awful. So most garments are made with polyester, and that's obviously down to companies cutting costs, trying to maximize profit margins. And the outcome for this is that clothing now doesn't last long. It just doesn't. Not only is clothing made with terrible, horrific materials like polyester, It's also finished terribly because they have all these garment workers in garment factories till now who are given unrealistic deadlines, so they rush every garment they make. They don't even spend much time on making the garments at all. And this is why people ask me, why do you buy high-end fashion? And now high-end fashion is not the only solution, because like I just said, there are a lot of high-end brands that say made in Italy, but really it's immigrant workers being paid slave wages and being treated like slaves. That is not what I consider made in Italy. What I consider made in Italy is an Italian factory that I know is workers being paid a fair wage, given good working conditions and given like a normal amount of rest time. So that's my idea. And there are definitely brands, like I talked about a brand recently, Isabel Beninato, that does that. Yeah, many brands that actually produce in France or Italy, as opposed to, you know, brands like Louis Vuitton that produce in these made in Italy factories, and they put made in Italy and made in France on their labels, but it isn't made in a high quality way. It's a gimmick. Basically, it's a huge gimmick. There are also many other ways that people cannot buy these crappy clothes that just go to landfills. You can thrift. I don't know what this whole thing is, that people think they're so cool they can't wear secondhand clothing. It's a bit strange. But yeah, you can definitely thrift. The secondhand clothing market is booming right now with things like Depop, Grailed, Vestiaire Co. There's a lot of things, a lot of resources you can do to buy legit and high quality secondhand garments. But in general, the issue I have with fast fashion, and this is the reason why I wouldn't say I don't wear fast fashion completely, because the way the system is, it's really, really difficult not to wear fast fashion, because I think I don't wear fast fashion, but then sportswear, there's no like high-endy alternative to sportswear, so you're still gonna buy a Nike t-shirt that's made like out of polyester and stuff like that. But for the most part, I try to do my best and not buy crappy clothes I'm only going to wear 2 times before it fades, rips, and I have to throw it away and put it in the landfill. And it's just quite annoying that people expect that a garment, like you can go to Primark and buy a t-shirt for £3. Just think of it, for a garment to cost £3, it means somewhere someone was paid cents. And that's food for thought. That's something that is good for people to remember. And yeah, the kind of history of ready-to-wear clothing is kind of why people nowadays overconsume. I mean, I have female friends who have closets full of clothing to the point where they can't even close their closet, yet they only wear the same 3 outfits every day. So it's like, why do you have all those clothes if you only wear the same 3 outfits every day? It's just a bit strange. And a lot of people, because garments are so cheap, it's kind of like, basically, I see it as like a ripple effect. It's like a circle of doom, so to speak. So here you've got garments that are really cheap that shouldn't be cheap, because for a dress to be £5, someone must have worked like a slave somewhere for cents. That's already the first problem. Now, because things are so cheap, when things are cheap, people just buy what they don't need because it's cheap. So then that leads people to buy clothes they don't need. And when people buy clothes they don't need, that invests money into these companies who are then going to make more trash clothes, and it just goes into the cycle. And then because people are buying clothes they don't need, they're wearing clothing like once or twice and then putting it into landfills. And that's why the pollution in fashion is huge. It's insane. But that being said, like I said really, really early in this video actually, there are different grades of kind of ready to wear clothing. There's a term that the French say, it's called prêt-à-porter. I'm not French, so sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. And basically what that term means is ready to wear in French. However, when the French say it, it means well-made ready to wear. So there's like ready to wear that's made in 90% polyester in a huge garment factory in Bangladesh, where people are paid slave wages, and the skill of these workers is not even high. That is one type of ready-to-wear. Then when the French actually say a word like prêt-à-porter, and it does translate literally into ready-to-wear, but their meaning of it means more like higher end, something that isn't mass-produced but it's made in a high quantity. So it's kind of like something that you would see Gucci kind of make for their mainline, or a brand like Comme des Garçons in the mainline, because they're making more than one piece, but they're not making tens of thousands. They're maybe making 500. They're making a lot, but not that many. They're making thousands with higher quality materials. I won't say high because not all of them make it in high quality materials, but higher quality materials, more expert seamstresses and tailors and stuff like that, made in garment factories where people are well rested, so they're more sharp and they're less likely to make mistakes and things like that. So yeah, but talking about, before I end this video, I actually feel like it's a good tangent to talk about luxury and high-end fashion and the concept of ready-to-wear in luxury fashion, because if you guys look at any fashion show now, it'll say something like Balenciaga ready-to-wear for winter 2020, or Chanel ready-to-wear for winter 2020. So the reason why it says ready-to-wear, I've explained what ready-to-wear is, so I'm not going to do that again. Before a certain point, and I don't have a script for this, I thought this would be good to add just off the top of my head. There was once upon a time when the fashion industry wasn't so rushed. Designers weren't expected to make loads of pieces of a garment that's on their runway. So designers would have a runway show. After the runway show, the buyers for different stores would decide what they like and then kind of give an order. And then through that order, then the company would go, or the designer or whatever, could be a small company, it could be a big one, they would then go and make the garments in larger quantities based on the orders. And that way there was kind of like less waste, because companies weren't just making aimless, like 10,000 garments aimlessly just for the sake of it. Whereas even the high-end luxury industry is like that now, because why they say ready-to-wear now is because these garments, these fashion shows now that say ready-to-wear, it means that once that show is over, you can buy those garments immediately. Not the general public, but if you're a VIP client, like you spend hundreds of thousands on a brand, you could potentially buy it then, literally after the show. Or if you're a buyer, you could literally buy it for your store immediately. And that's why Balenciaga released this like footwear, things like the Tyrex and all that stuff, quite recently, and it's already in like so many stores, because immediately that thing debuted on a runway, loads of stores bought it there and got shipments to all their stores quickly. And that's why it could literally release worldwide a few months later, because all the stockists had it in the store, like ready. And that is crazy how rushed even the luxury industry is now. So that's just something I thought to add, because it wasn't always like that. It wasn't always like ready to wear. You can buy things now. Things back then, and this is just the industry in general, back then people just took their time to make garments. People took more time to make garments, and now unfortunately everything's just rushed. And I really hope that society will start to realize that you can't buy a shirt for, like, it's not ethical to buy a shirt for £5. It means that someone worked for a cent somewhere in the world. And yeah, I just hope that people value quality garments, and I hope people kind of appreciate things fitting right, and I hope people don't overconsume, because when people start to think in this manner, companies like H&M will go out of business, and quite naturally the fashion industry will shift into people and kind of companies caring more about quality, because that's what the consumer cares about. But yeah, enough ranting, enough rambling. I hope you guys have learned something about ready-to-wear fashion from this video. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Turn on your post notifications, because a lot of guys have said they don't get my notifications when I post. So now's your chance, guys. Turn on your post notifications. If you want to support the channel financially, I do have a Patreon. The link to that is in the description below. You can also follow me on Instagram. A lot of people ask me questions on Instagram, so you can follow me at @FashionRoadman. But yeah, on that note, thank you very much for watching this very long video, and I'll be back with another long video explaining everything you need to know about Moncler Genius. So that should be interesting. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate. I still can't believe right now I've got like what, over 20,000 subscribers. I never actually had time to like thank everyone, but it's actually insane, because I think I'm an extremely boring person, and the fact that people listen to these videos on a consistent basis and interact is quite crazy to me. So yeah, thank you to all of you. But anyway, I'm out. I'm done.